Welcome back to Verified Fears, where we explore the darkest corners of reality. Gas stations, those familiar beacons of light we've all relied on during late-night drives and emergency stops. They're supposed to be safe havens where we fuel up and continue our journey. But what happens when these ordinary places become the setting for our worst nightmares? Tonight, we're diving into 11 genuinely disturbing encounters that took place at gas stations across the country. These aren't urban legends. These are real experiences shared by real people who found themselves face to face with the unexplainable, the dangerous, and the downright terrifying. From night shift employees who witness things they can't explain, to travelers who stumbled into situations that changed them forever. So lock your doors, turn up the volume, and prepare yourself for 11 true gas station horror stories that will make you think twice before stopping at that isolated station on your next late-night drive. My name is Henrik, and I've been working the night shift at Quick Trip for about 8 months now. I took this job because I'm a community college student, and the overnight hours work perfectly with my class schedule. Plus, the pay is decent, and most nights are pretty quiet, just the occasional trucker, late-night worker, or someone picking up energy drinks and snacks. I thought I'd seen every type of customer there was until I met him. It started about 3 months into my job, on a Tuesday night in early February. The weather was typical for our suburban location in Kansas. Cold, with that light drizzle that makes everything look gray and miserable under the fluorescent lights. I was restocking the coffee station around 2:30 a.m. when I heard the door chime. I looked up to see a man walk in. Average height, maybe mid-30s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. Nothing unusual about him at first glance, except for the fact that he moved with this strange, deliberate precision, like every step was calculated. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't make eye contact, just walked straight to the back of the store toward the refrigerated section. I went back to what I was doing, thinking nothing of it. A few minutes later, he approached the counter with his items: a bag of plain salted peanuts, a bottle of water, and a pack of generic gum. Still no eye contact, no greeting. When I told him the total, he placed exact change on the counter. Not in my hand. Just set it down carefully in a neat pile. He took his receipt, his items, and left without saying a single word. I figured maybe he was just tired or shy or having a bad night. We all have those days, right? But then he came back the next night. Same time, 2:30 a.m. exactly. Same items, peanuts, water, gum. Same routine, no eye contact. Exact change on the counter, complete silence. This time I tried to be friendly, said, "Hey, how's your night going?" He didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that I had spoken. It was like I wasn't there. By the 4th night, I started paying closer attention. He always parked in the same spot, the 3rd space from the left, under the light that flickered slightly. He always took the same path through the store, never deviating by even a step. And here's what really started to creep me out. He always knew exactly what his total would be. The exact change was ready before I even scanned his items, like he had it counted out in his car. After 2 weeks of this routine, I mentioned it to my manager, Janet, when she came in for the morning shift. She laughed and said we get all kinds of weirdos on the night shift, told me not to worry about it as long as he wasn't causing trouble. But it was causing trouble, for me, mentally. I started anticipating his arrival every night. I'd find myself watching the clock, getting anxious as 2:30 approached. The consistency was unnerving in a way I couldn't explain. One night, about a month into this pattern, I decided to test something. I moved the peanuts to a different shelf, just to see what would happen. At exactly 2:30 a.m., he walked in, went to the usual spot where the peanuts had been, and just stood there. For 5 minutes, he stood completely still, staring at the empty shelf where his peanuts should have been. He didn't look around, didn't search for them, didn't ask for help. Just stood there like a machine that had encountered an error it couldn't process. Finally, I called out from behind the counter. "The peanuts are over here now, on aisle 3. He slowly turned his head toward me, the first time he had ever looked directly at me. And I felt this chill run down my spine. His eyes were completely blank, not just unfocused, but empty in a way that made my stomach turn. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. Then walked to aisle 3, got his peanuts, completed his usual routine, and left. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about those eyes. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had some kind of mental condition, autism spectrum, or social anxiety that made him uncomfortable with interaction. I felt guilty for being creeped out by someone who might just be struggling with something beyond their control. I decided to try being more understanding, maybe even helpful. The next Tuesday, I had his items ready on the counter when he walked in. "Hey there," I said, trying to sound friendly and non-threatening. "I noticed you get the same things every night, so I grabbed them for you. Thought it might save you some time." He stopped dead in his tracks about 5 feet from the counter. For a moment, I thought maybe I had made a breakthrough, that he might actually respond or show some kind of appreciation. Instead, he slowly shook his head back and forth, like he was saying no to something I couldn't hear. Then he walked to the back of the store, followed his exact usual path, picked up the same items even though they were right there on the counter, and completed his routine as if I hadn't done anything at all. The items I had set aside for him just sat there, ignored completely. After that night, something changed in his behavior. He still came at 2:30 a.m., still bought the same items, still maintained his silence. But now, every time he approached the counter, he would pause and stare at me with those empty eyes for exactly 10 seconds before placing his money down. It felt like he was studying me, or maybe warning me about something. The really disturbing part started about 2 weeks later. I began noticing that he wasn't just looking at me during those 10 seconds. He was looking at specific parts of me. One night, his eyes focused on my name tag. The next night, he stared at my hands, then my shoes, my hair, the small scar on my chin from a childhood accident. It was like he was cataloging details about me, memorizing everything. I started varying my routine, hoping to break whatever pattern he was following. I'd wear different clothes, style my hair differently, even wore a fake mustache one night just to see if he'd notice. He noticed everything. When I wore the mustache, he stared at it for the full 10 seconds, then slowly shook his head the same way he had when I'd tried to help him with his items. The breaking point came on a particularly rainy Thursday night in April. I was feeling brave, maybe stupidly so, and when he walked in, I decided to break his routine completely. "We're closed for inventory," I lied, putting up the "Sorry, we're closed" sign on the door after he entered. "You'll have to come back tomorrow." He stood there for a moment, processing what I had said. Then he walked to his usual spot in the refrigerated section, stood there for exactly 3 minutes, the time it normally took him to gather his items, walked to the counter, and placed exact change on the surface, even though there were no items to purchase. He stood there staring at me for those 10 seconds. But this time, something was different in his eyes. They weren't empty anymore. They were angry. He left without his usual items, but he took his receipt, a blank receipt that I hadn't even given him. but somehow appeared in his hand. The next morning, Janet called me frantically. The security cameras had picked up something impossible. Footage of the man in our store at 2:30 a.m., going through his exact routine, purchasing his items and leaving. But according to the register logs and my own memory, no transaction had taken place that night. I never saw him again after that Thursday. It's been 4 months now, and every night at 2:30 a.m., I still find myself watching the door, waiting for him to walk in. Part of me is relieved that he's gone. But a bigger part of me is terrified that wherever he went, he took something with him. Some piece of information about me that he spent all those nights collecting. Sometimes I wonder if he was ever really there at all, or if I was slowly losing my mind during those long, isolated night shifts. But then I remember those eyes, the way they studied every detail about me. And I know that whatever he was, wherever he came from, he was very real. And somehow, I don't think our story is over. I just hope that when it continues, I'm ready for whatever he was preparing for all those silent nights. I still work the night shift at Quick Trip, but now I keep the doors locked until I see who's trying to come in. Because you never know when someone might be watching you a little too closely, learning a little too much, and waiting for just the right moment to complete whatever routine they've been practicing in the dark. My name is Brooke, and I'm a junior at the University of Colorado studying biology. What I'm about to tell you happened last October when I was driving home for fall break. I've made this drive from Boulder to my parents' house in Billings dozens of times. But I'd never experienced anything like what happened that foggy night on a stretch of Montana highway that I swear wasn't there before. I had left campus around 8 p.m., later than I usually prefer for the 6-hour drive. But I'd had to finish a lab report that was due before break. My plan was to drive straight through, maybe stop once for gas and coffee, and be home by 2 a.m. I knew the route like the back of my hand. Take I-25 north to I-80 west, then connect to I-90 through Wyoming and into Montana. It's mostly interstate driving, well lit and safe, with plenty of truck stops and gas stations along the way. Everything was normal for the first few hours. I made good time through Colorado and into Wyoming, listening to podcasts and staying alert with gas station coffee. The weather was clear when I started, but as I got deeper into Wyoming, a thick fog began rolling in from the mountains. By the time I crossed into Montana around 10:30 p.m., visibility was down to maybe 50 feet in front of my headlights. I was being extra careful, driving slower than usual, when I saw a sign that made me second-guess myself. Mile marker 47, next services 23 miles. That didn't seem right. I knew this stretch of highway pretty well, and there should have been at least 2 or 3 gas stations between where I was and Billings. But the fog was so thick, and I was getting tired, so I figured maybe I was just confused about exactly where I was. About 20 minutes later, I saw lights cutting through the fog ahead. The familiar glow of a gas station. I was running low on fuel anyway, so I decided to stop, fill up, and maybe ask for directions to make sure I was still on the right track. As I got closer, I could make out the Texaco sign, red and white cutting through the gray mist like a lighthouse beacon. The station looked older than most of the modern truck stops I was used to seeing on the interstate. It had that vintage feel, a small building with large windows, 2 pumps under a canopy, and a couple of those old-style rounded gas pumps that you don't see much anymore. But it was well lit and looked open, so I pulled up to the pump closest to the building. That's when I noticed how quiet everything was. On a major interstate, even at 11 p.m., you usually hear the distant hum of truck engines, maybe other cars passing by. But here, The only sound was my engine ticking as it cooled, and the soft hiss of the fog moving across the pavement. I couldn't even hear any traffic on what should have been a busy highway just a few hundred feet away. I got out to pump gas, and the fog seemed even thicker now, creating this weird bubble of visibility around the station. I couldn't see beyond the edge of the canopy lighting, couldn't see the highway I had just driven in from. It was like the gas station existed in its own little pocket of reality, cut off from everything else. The pump was one of those older models where you have to go inside to pay first. I walked toward the building, and through the large windows, I could see a man behind the counter. He looked to be in his 50s, wearing a Texaco uniform shirt, and he was reading a newspaper. Normal enough, except when I got closer, I realized he was reading the same page over and over, his eyes moving in the exact same pattern each time. The bell above the door chimed when I walked in, and he looked up with this expression that I can only describe as relief mixed with panic. "Thank God you're here," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "How many of you are there?" "Just me," I replied, confused by the question. "I need $40 on pump 2, please." He stared at me for a moment, then glanced nervously toward the windows. "Just you? You're traveling alone?" When I nodded, his face went pale. Oh no, that's not good. They don't like it when people come alone." I felt my stomach drop. Who doesn't like it? "What are you talking about?" He leaned across the counter, speaking in a whisper, even though we were clearly the only two people in the building. "Listen to me very carefully. I've been working here for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what's been happening tonight. There are people watching the station. They've been out there in the fog for hours, just watching. Every time someone stops alone, something happens to them." I looked out the windows, but all I could see was the thick fog swirling under the lights. "What kind of people?" "What do you mean, something happens?" "I don't know what they are," he said, his hands trembling as he processed my payment. "But they're not right. They stand just outside the light, where you can barely make them out. And they watch. A trucker stopped here around 9 p.m., big guy, looked like he could handle himself. When he came in, there were 3 of them standing by his truck. He saw them too, asked me what they wanted. I told him what I'm telling you. Just get your gas and go. Don't engage with them. Don't look directly at them." "What happened to the trucker?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The attendant's voice dropped even lower. "He went back out to pump his gas, and I watched through the window. They got closer, formed a circle around his truck. He tried to ignore them, just like I said. But then one of them started talking to him. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see his face changing, like he was getting confused or scared. Then they all started talking at once, and he just stopped moving. Stood there for maybe 10 minutes while they talked to him. Then he got in his truck and drove off in the wrong direction. Didn't even finish pumping his gas." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. Maybe he just changed his mind about which way he was going. "The road he turned down doesn't go anywhere," the attendant said. "It's an old mining road that's been closed for 20 years. Leads up into the mountains and just stops at a washed-out bridge. There's no way out once you're on it." I wanted to believe he was just trying to scare me. Maybe some kind of local legend or prank they played on travelers. But the genuine fear in his eyes was unmistakable. This man was terrified, and that terror was starting to infect me too. "So, what do I do?" I asked. "I need gas to get home." Pump fast, don't look around, don't listen if they try to talk to you, and get back on the highway as quickly as possible. And whatever you do, don't go the way that trucker went. Stay on the main road, even if they try to convince you there's a shortcut. I took my receipt and headed for the door, my heart racing. As I reached for the handle, the attendant called out, "Wait. If you make it out of here, if you get back to the main highway safely, do me a favor. Call the state police when you get to the next town. Tell them what's happening here. I've tried calling, but the phone lines have been down since this started." I stepped outside, and immediately I could feel that something was wrong. The fog seemed thicker now, more oppressive, and there was a smell in the air that I couldn't identify. Something sweet and rotten at the same time. As I walked toward my car, I kept my eyes focused on the ground, remembering the attendant's warning not to look around. But as I reached for the gas pump, I heard it, a voice calling my name. "Brooke," it said, soft and friendly. "Brooke, over here." I froze. Nobody here knew my name. I hadn't introduced myself to the attendant, hadn't used a credit card that would show my name. There was no way anyone could know who I was. "Brooke, we've been waiting for you," the voice continued. And now I could tell it was coming from somewhere in the fog to my left. "We have something to show you, something important about your trip home." I forced myself to keep pumping gas, hands shaking as I tried to ignore the voice. But then I heard another one, from a different direction. "Your parents are worried about you, Brooke. They asked us to help you find a faster way home. There's a shortcut just up the road." The pumps seemed to be taking forever. I could hear more voices now, coming from all around the station, all calling my name, all claiming they wanted to help me. They knew details they shouldn't know. My parents' names, my major in school, even the name of my childhood pet. It was like they had access to my entire life history. "The road you're on is dangerous, Brooke," one of them said, the voice getting closer. "There's been an accident up ahead. Police have the highway blocked, but we know another way. A better way." Finally, the pump clicked off. I hung it up and ran back to my car, fumbling with the keys as the voices grew louder and more insistent. As I started the engine, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. Shapes in the fog getting closer to my car. I slammed the car into drive and floored it, heading back toward what I hoped was the main highway. In my rearview mirror, I could see the gas station's lights fading into the fog. And for just a moment, I thought I saw figures standing under the canopy, watching me leave. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake at night. When I finally found the interstate again and looked at my GPS, it showed that I had been driving for over 2 hours in what should have been a 20-minute detour. And when I called my parents the next morning to tell them I'd made it home safely, they said the strangest thing. They'd received a call around midnight from someone claiming to be a state trooper, saying I'd been in an accident on a mountain road and they were trying to locate my next of kin. I never found that gas station again. I've driven that same route dozens of times since then. Even took a detour specifically looking for it. But it's not there. And when I called the state police to report what the attendant had asked me to, they told me there was no Texaco station at mile marker 47. According to their records, there never had been. My name is Danny, and I've been a bread delivery driver for Wonder Bread for the past 12 years. I know my routes like the back of my hand. Every gas station, convenience store, and diner that stocks our products across 3 counties in southern Illinois. I take pride in being reliable. Store owners depend on me to show up on schedule, and I've never missed a delivery in over a decade of service. That's what made what happened last March so disturbing, because according to everyone involved, I had never existed in their world at all. It was a Tuesday morning, around 5:15 a.m., and I was running my usual route. I'd already hit the first 4 stops on my list and was heading to Murphy's Shell Station on Route 51, just outside of Centralia. This particular station had been one of my regular customers for about 8 years. The owner, Tom Murphy, was a friendly guy in his 60s who always had coffee ready and liked to chat about baseball while I restocked his bread shelves. His station wasn't huge, but it did decent business with truckers and commuters, and he ordered 3 times a week: Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. The weather that morning was typical for March in Illinois. Overcast and cool, with that gray light that makes everything look washed out. I pulled up to the delivery entrance on the side of the building, same as I had hundreds of times before, and grabbed my dolly and the 2 cases of assorted bread products Tom had ordered. The station looked exactly as it always did. Same faded shell sign, same crack in the concrete by the door, same handwritten "No Loitering" sign that had been there since I started delivering there. I walked through the side entrance that led directly to the store area, calling out, "Morning, Tom. Got your delivery," like I did every time. But instead of Tom's familiar voice responding from behind the counter, I heard an unfamiliar woman's voice say, "Excuse me, can I help you?" I looked up to see a woman in her 40s standing behind the register, someone I had never seen before. She was looking at me with a mixture of confusion and concern, like I had just walked into her house uninvited. "Hi," I said, figuring maybe Tom had hired someone new for the morning shift. "I'm Danny from Wonder Bread, here with Tom's regular delivery." The woman stared at me for a moment, then shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong place. We don't order bread from Wonder Bread. We never have." I felt that initial flutter of confusion you get when something doesn't make sense. "Is Tom here? Tom Murphy, the owner? Maybe there's been a mix-up with the ordering system." "Sir," the woman said, and now she was looking at me like I might be mentally unstable. "I am Tom Murphy. I've owned this station for 15 years, and I'm telling you, we don't carry Wonder Bread products. We get our bread from a local bakery, same as we always have." The world seemed to tilt slightly. This woman was definitely not the Tom Murphy I had been delivering to for 8 years. That Tom was a man, heavy-set with graying hair and a Chicago Cubs baseball cap he wore religiously. But she seemed completely sincere, and more importantly, she seemed to genuinely believe she was telling me the truth. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to process what was happening. "There must be some mistake. I've been delivering here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the past 8 years. Tom Murphy, male, about 60, always wears a Cubs hat. He orders 2 cases mixed bread products." The woman, who was apparently also named Tom Murphy, looked at me with what I could only describe as pity. "Sir, I don't know what to tell you. I've been the sole owner and operator of this station since 2010. There's never been a male owner named Tom Murphy here. And I'm looking at our vendor list right now," she said, pulling out a clipboard from behind the counter. "And Wonder Bread is not on it. Never has been." I set down my dolly, my hands starting to shake slightly. Can I see that list?" She hesitated for a moment, probably thinking I was some kind of scam artist or that I was having a breakdown. But eventually, she turned the clipboard around. I scanned through the list of suppliers, and she was right. No Wonder Bread. No mention of my company at all. But there, at the bottom of the list, was something that made my stomach drop. Murphy's Bakery, local bread supplier since 2010. "Murphy's Bakery," I said slowly. "Any relation?" "That's my brother's business," she replied. "He's been supplying us with bread since I opened. Why would I need to order from a big commercial company when I can support family business?" I stood there for several long moments, trying to make sense of what was happening. Either I was having some kind of mental breakdown, or something very strange was going on. "Ma'am, I know this is going to sound crazy, but would you mind if I called my dispatcher, just to check my delivery records?" She nodded, though she was clearly getting more concerned about my mental state by the minute. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the number for Wonder Bread Dispatch, a number I had memorized years ago. When Jenny, the morning dispatcher, picked up, I explained the situation as calmly as I could. "Danny," Jenny said after I finished, "I'm looking at your route sheet right now. You don't have a delivery scheduled for Murphy's Shell Station today. In fact, I don't show any Murphy's Shell Station on any of our routes. Are you sure you're at the right address?" "Jenny, I've been delivering to this place for 8 years. Route 51, just outside Centralia, Murphy's Shell Station. Tom Murphy, the owner." There was a long pause on the other end. "Danny, I've been working dispatch for 10 years, and I've never heard you mention a Murphy's Shell Station. And I'm looking at our customer database. We don't have any Shell stations in the Centralia area. Never have, according to these records." The phone felt heavy in my hand. "Jenny, can you check my delivery logs? See what stops I've been making on Tuesdays, Mondays, and Fridays for the past 8 years." Another pause, longer this time. "Danny, your Tuesday route has always been the same 5 stops. No Shell station. Your Monday and Friday routes don't go anywhere near Centralia. According to our records, you've been following the same routes for the past 8 years, and Murphy's Shell has never been on any of them." I hung up the phone, my hands now visibly shaking. The woman behind the counter was watching me with growing concern. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need me to call someone for you?" "The security cameras," I said suddenly. "You must have security cameras. Can you check them? See if I've been here before?" She looked uncertain, but after a moment, she nodded. "I suppose I could check. When do you think you were here last?" "Friday, 3 days ago. Same time, around 5:15 a.m. She disappeared into a back office for several minutes, and I stood there in the middle of the store, surrounded by shelves of products that looked exactly as they had 3 days earlier, trying to understand how the world I thought I knew could be so completely wrong. When she returned, her expression had changed from concern to something closer to fear. "Sir," she said quietly, "I checked the security footage from Friday morning. Between 5 a.m. and 5:30 a.m., no delivery trucks came to this station. No Wonder Bread truck, no trucks at all. Just a couple of cars getting gas." "That's impossible," I whispered. "I was here. I remember talking to Tom about the Cubs' spring training. He paid for the delivery in cash, like he always does. I loaded the bread into that display case right there." I pointed to the bread display near the front of the store, and she followed my gaze. "Sir, that case has been stocked with bread from my brother's bakery for 15 years. The same bread that's in it right now." I walked over to the display case and stared at it. The bread looked different brands, different packaging than what I remembered delivering. But the case itself was exactly as I remembered it, down to a small scratch on the glass front that I had noticed for years. "I need to go," I said suddenly, feeling like the walls of the store were closing in on me. "I'm sorry for bothering you." "Sir, wait," she called as I headed for the door, leaving my dolly and the bread cases behind. Are you sure you're okay? Maybe you should call your company again or see a doctor. But I was already out the door, practically running to my truck. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror at the station, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a different person behind the counter, a heavy-set man in a Cubs cap, waving goodbye the way Tom always did. When I got back to the Wonder Bread Depot, I went straight to my supervisor's office and told him everything that had happened. He listened patiently, then pulled out my personnel file and route assignments. According to every piece of documentation the company had, I had never been assigned to deliver to Murphy's Shell Station. My routes had been consistent for 8 years, and they didn't include any stops in Centralia. But here's what haunts me the most. When I got home that night, I looked through my personal records, my mileage logs, my gas receipts, even photos I had taken over the years during my routes. There was no evidence that I had ever been to Murphy's Shell Station. No photos, no receipts from that area, no extra mileage that would account for the detour. It was as if those 8 years of deliveries had happened in some parallel version of my life. I still drive the same routes for Wonder Bread, but now I pay closer attention to every stop, every customer, every detail of my deliveries. Because if 8 years of my life could just disappear like that, without any trace or memory from anyone else, how do I know the rest of my reality is as solid as it seems? And sometimes, late at night when I'm filling out my delivery logs, I wonder if somewhere out there's another version of me still making deliveries to a Tom Murphy who remembers our conversations about baseball. In a world where everything makes sense the way it used to. My name is Alex, and 3 weeks ago I started working the overnight shift at the 7-Eleven on Martin Luther King Boulevard, in what most people would call the rough part of town. I'd been unemployed for 4 months after losing my job at the call center, and I was desperate enough to take anything that paid above minimum wage. The night shift paid an extra $2 an hour, which I needed, and the manager, Carlos, seemed like a decent guy when he hired me. What he didn't tell me during the interview was why the position was suddenly available, or why they'd gone through 5 night shift employees in the past 6 months. Carlos trained me for 3 nights, walking me through the routine, restocking, cleaning, handling the occasional drunk or homeless person who wandered in, and most importantly, staying alert. The neighborhood wasn't the safest, but the store had good security cameras, panic buttons, and a direct line to the police station. Just keep your head down, don't be a hero, and call the cops if anything feels off, he told me. Standard advice for working nights in a convenience store. My first solo shift was on a Thursday night in October. The autumn air was crisp, and there was something about being alone in that brightly lit store, surrounded by the darkness outside, that felt both peaceful and unsettling. The first few hours passed normally, a few customers buying cigarettes, energy drinks, and snacks. Around 2 a.m., things got quiet, which Carlos had warned me about. That's when you do the cleaning and restocking, he'd said. Keeps you busy and makes the time pass faster. I was wiping down the coffee station when I noticed something wedged behind one of the machines. At first, I thought it was just trash that had fallen back there. But when I pulled it out, I found a folded piece of paper. It was a note, written in shaky handwriting. If you're reading this, you're the new night guy. Don't go in the back room alone after 3 a.m. Whatever you hear back there, it's not rats. And don't trust the regular who comes in at 4:30. He knows more than he should. Marcus. The note was dated 3 weeks earlier. Marcus must have been the guy who worked this shift before me. Carlos had mentioned that the previous employee had quit suddenly, said he'd found something better. But looking at this note, I wondered if there was more to the story. Still, I figured it was probably just someone trying to spook the new guy. Night shift workers love their urban legends and ghost stories. But then, around 3:15 a.m., I heard it. A tapping sound coming from the back room where we kept extra inventory and the employee break area. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone tapping on metal with something hard. I grabbed a flashlight from behind the counter and slowly approached the back room. The tapping stopped as soon as I reached the door. I opened it carefully and shined the light around. Nothing looked disturbed. Boxes of merchandise, stacked neatly, the old table and chairs we used for breaks, the time clock on the wall. But there was something else, another note, this one taped to the inside of the door where I would see it when I opened it. This handwriting was different. Night shifts get easier once you learn to ignore certain things. The tapping always stops if someone's listening. Don't acknowledge the sounds and they'll leave you alone. The previous guy didn't listen. Sarah. This note was dated 2 months earlier. Sarah must have been the employee before Marcus. Now I was really starting to feel uneasy. 2 different people, both warning about strange sounds in the back room. I decided to stay behind the counter for the rest of my shift and avoid the back room unless absolutely necessary. The next night, I found another note, this one tucked under the cash register. Third night is when it gets worse. They test you. The customer who comes in at 4:30 isn't really a customer. Notice how he never buys anything, just walks around touching things and watching you. When he asks personal questions, don't answer. He's collecting information. David. David's note was dated 4 months ago. 3 different employees, all leaving warnings for whoever came next. I started to wonder if this was some kind of elaborate prank, but the fear in these handwritten messages felt genuine. These people had been scared, really scared, and they'd taken the time to leave warnings for the next person who would work alone in this store. Around 4:20 a.m. on my 3rd night, I was dreading what might happen. I'd positioned myself so I could see the entire store, and I had my phone ready to call the police if needed. At exactly 4:30, a man walked through the front door. He was tall, thin, wearing a gray jacket and dark pants. Nothing unusual about his appearance, but something about the way he moved set off alarm bells in my head. Instead of going to any particular section of the store, he wandered the aisles slowly, picking up random items and examining them before putting them back exactly where they'd been. A can of soup, a magazine, a bag of chips. He'd pick each thing up, study it for a few seconds, then return it to its precise location on the shelf. He never looked at me directly, but I had the feeling he was very aware of where I was at all times. After about 10 minutes of this strange shopping behavior, he approached the counter. "Working here long?" he asked, his voice flat and emotionless. Remembering David's warning, I just shrugged and said, "Not really." "You live around here?" he continued, now making direct eye contact. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they seemed to look right through me. "I don't really discuss personal stuff at work," I replied, trying to sound casual while my heart was racing. He smiled then, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made you want to take a step back. "Smart policy," he said. The last guy was more talkative. He told me all sorts of interesting things about himself. His schedule, where he went to school, what car he drove. Very helpful information. The way he said "was" sent chills down my spine. Not "is more talkative," but "was." Like Marcus was no longer around to be talkative. The man stood there for another minute, just staring at me with that unsettling smile. then turned and walked out without buying anything, just like the note had predicted. Over the following nights, I found more notes hidden throughout the store. Behind the lottery ticket dispenser, taped under the Slurpee machine, even one hidden inside the employee handbook. Each one was from a different former employee, and together they painted a picture of something very wrong with this job. The tapping isn't random, it's Morse code. I figured out some of the messages. They're asking for help. Jennifer. Found photos of myself in the dumpster out back. Someone's been watching my apartment. Quitting tomorrow. Mike. The 4:30 guy knows things he shouldn't. He described my sister's car perfectly, down to the dent in the bumper. I never mentioned having a sister. Lisa. Whatever's in the back room knocked over a whole stack of boxes last week. Cameras don't pick it up, but I saw it happen. Management says it's settling foundation, but foundations don't knock things over in patterns. Tony. The notes went back almost 2 years, from nearly a dozen different night shift employees. All of them had experienced strange things. All of them had quit suddenly. And all of them had tried to warn whoever came next. The breaking point came during my second week. I was cleaning the coffee area around 3 a.m. when I heard the tapping from the back room again. This time, instead of just rhythmic tapping, there was a pattern. Having read Jennifer's note about Morse code, I tried to listen more carefully. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. It repeated several times. SOS. Against my better judgment, I approached the back room. The tapping got louder as I got closer, more insistent. When I opened the door, the sound stopped abruptly. But there on the floor was something that hadn't been there before. A newspaper clipping. It was from 6 months ago. A small article about a night shift convenience store worker who had gone missing. The headline read, "Local man vanishes after leaving work. Car found empty at home." Below the headline was a photo that made my blood freeze. It was Marcus, the same guy whose note I'd found behind the coffee machine. I called in sick for the next 3 nights, but I knew I couldn't avoid going back forever. I needed the job, and maybe I was overreacting. When I finally returned, there was a fresh note waiting for me. This one right on top of the cash register where I couldn't miss it. You're smart to be scared, but running won't help. He knows who you are now. The only way out is to find out what happened to us. Look in the ceiling tiles above the back room. Marcus. The handwriting was the same as the first note I'd found, but this one was dated yesterday. Marcus had been missing for 6 months, but somehow he'd left me a note yesterday. That's when I realized that the tapping, the notes, the strange customer, it wasn't just about scaring night shift workers. It was about something much worse. And whatever had happened to Marcus, to Jennifer, to all the others, I was next in line. I quit the next morning, but not before I looked in those ceiling tiles. What I found there was a collection of personal items. ID cards, car keys, cell phones, belonging to people whose names I recognized from the notes. People who had supposedly quit and moved away, but who had left behind everything they'd need to actually leave town. Carlos seemed relieved when I quit, which told me he knew more than he'd let on. He probably went through this cycle regularly. Hire someone desperate enough to work nights, hope they last a few weeks, then find a replacement when they inevitably disappeared. I never reported what I found to the police. Who would believe me? But I did leave my own note, hidden behind the coffee machine where the next desperate soul would eventually find it. Don't work here alone. Don't trust the regular customer. And whatever you do, Don't try to help the voices in the back room. They're not asking for rescue. They're asking for company. Alex, I hope whoever finds it is smarter than I was. I hope they run faster and don't look back. Because some jobs aren't worth the extra $2 an hour, no matter how desperate you are. My name is Christian, and I've been a long-haul trucker for the past 15 years. I've driven every major highway in the continental United States, from the ice-covered roads of Minnesota in January to the scorching asphalt of Arizona in July. In all those years of driving, I thought I'd seen everything the road could throw at me. Bad weather, aggressive drivers, mechanical breakdowns, you name it. But what happened to me at a truck stop in Nevada 3 months ago still makes my hands shake when I think about it, and it's changed how I approach every stop I make. I was hauling a load of electronics from Los Angeles to Denver, running a tight schedule to make my delivery window. It was one of those loads where every hour mattered, and I'd been pushing hard for 2 days straight, only stopping for fuel, food, and the mandatory rest breaks. By the time I hit Nevada, it was around 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I was running on fumes, both my truck and myself. The next fuel stop was a large truck stop complex about 50 miles outside of Las Vegas, one of those 24-hour operations that cater to long-haul drivers with fuel pumps, a restaurant, showers, and a small convenience store. The night was clear and cold, typical for the Nevada desert in late fall. Stars were visible for miles in every direction, and the truck stop's lights created this island of brightness in the vast darkness of the desert. I pulled into the fueling area, which was mostly empty except for a couple of other big rigs. Most truckers try to avoid stopping in the middle of the night unless they absolutely have to. But sometimes schedules don't give you a choice. I was going through my routine, checking my logs, calculating how much fuel I needed, stretching my legs before the pump started, when another truck pulled up to the pump directly across from mine. It was a newer Peterbilt, dark blue with chrome details, pulling what looked like a standard dry van trailer. Nothing unusual about the rig itself, but something about the way the driver maneuvered it into position caught my attention. He was precise to the point of being mechanical, like he'd done this exact same maneuver thousands of times in this exact same spot. The driver climbed down from his cab, and I got my first good look at him. He was probably in his 40s, average height and build, wearing a standard trucker uniform of jeans, work boots, and a flannel shirt. But there was something about his movements that seemed off, too deliberate, too calculated. He started fueling his truck, but instead of going through the normal routine of checking his tires, cleaning his windshield, or grabbing a coffee like most drivers do during a fuel stop, he just stood there watching me. At first, I figured he was just being friendly, maybe planning to come over and chat once we were both done fueling. Truckers are generally a social bunch, especially during long hauls when you've been alone in your cab for hours. But as I went through my routine, I noticed he was paying very close attention to everything I was doing. Not just casual observation, but focused studying, like he was memorizing my habits. When I finished fueling and headed toward the convenience store to grab some coffee and pay for my fuel, he fell into step beside me. "Christian Molina, right?" he said. And the sound of my full name coming from a complete stranger stopped me cold. "You're running electronics to Denver. Should be there by Thursday morning." I stared at him, my mind racing. I hadn't introduced myself. My name wasn't visible on my truck or my clothing, and I definitely hadn't mentioned my cargo or delivery schedule to anyone. "How do you know that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. It was the kind of smile that predators use to put their prey at ease. "I make it my business to know things about the drivers I meet," he said. "For instance, I know you live in a small apartment complex in Tucson, drive a red Ford pickup when you're not in your rig, and that you call your sister Martha every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. The blood drained from my face. Every detail he'd mentioned was accurate, including the Sunday phone calls to my sister, which was something I'd never mentioned to anyone. It was just a personal routine I'd developed over the years. "Who are you?" I demanded. "How do you know all this?" "The better question," he replied, still wearing that unsettling smile, "is why I know all this. See, Christian, I've been following your route for the past 3 weeks. LA to Phoenix on the 15th, Phoenix to Albuquerque on the 22nd, and now this run to Denver. I know your preferred truck stops, the restaurants where you eat, even which parking spots you choose at rest areas." I felt like I was going to be sick. 3 weeks of being followed, and I'd never noticed. How was that possible? "What do you want?" I asked, my hand moving instinctively toward the knife I kept clipped to my belt. "Relax," he said, noticing my movement. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to offer you an opportunity. You see, there are certain cargo opportunities that become available to drivers who are willing to be flexible about their routes and ask fewer questions. Very profitable opportunities. I'm not interested in whatever you're selling," I said, starting to back toward the store entrance. "And I'm calling the police if you don't stay away from me." His expression changed then, the fake friendliness disappearing completely. "I don't think you understand the situation, Christian. This isn't really a request. You see, I have quite a bit of information about you now. Your apartment address, your sister's phone number, your regular schedule. It would be unfortunate if something happened to, say, your sister Martha during one of your long hauls when you're hundreds of miles away and can't help her." The threat was clear, and it hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just some random criminal looking for an easy mark. This was someone who had been systematically stalking me, learning my patterns, identifying my vulnerabilities. And now he was using my love for my sister to force me into some kind of illegal activity. "You're insane if you think I'm going to help you with anything," I said, and my voice shaking with both fear and anger. "And if you go anywhere near my sister, I'll kill you myself." He laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Christian, you're thinking about this all wrong. I'm not your enemy here. I'm offering you a partnership. All you have to do is make a small detour on your next few runs, pick up some additional cargo, and deliver it along with your regular loads. Nobody gets hurt, you make some extra money, and everyone's happy." "What kind of cargo?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to know the answer. "The kind that doesn't show up on manifests," he replied. "The kind that certain people pay very well to have transported quietly and efficiently. And before you start getting all righteous about it, let me remind you that your sister lives alone in that little house on Maple Street, works late shifts at the hospital, and has to walk through that poorly lit parking garage every night." The specific details about Martha's life confirmed my worst fears. This man didn't just know about me. He'd been watching my family too. He'd done his research, identified exactly how to control me, and now he was applying pressure in the most effective way possible. "I need time to think about it," I said, stalling while I tried to figure out what to do. "Of course," he said, his fake smile returning. "Take all the time you need. I'll be in touch with more details about your first pickup. Oh, and Christian, don't bother trying to change your routes or your schedule. I'll find you wherever you go. And don't think about going to the police. By the time they could do anything, poor Martha might have already had one of those unfortunate accidents that happen to women walking alone at night." With that, he turned and walked back toward his truck, leaving me standing there shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. I watched him drive away, memorizing his license plate number and the details of his rig, but I had a sinking feeling that none of that information would do me any good. Someone this organized, this thorough in his stalking, wouldn't be using his real identity or registration. I went inside the convenience store and immediately called Martha. It was 3:30 a.m., but I had to make sure she was safe. She answered on the fourth ring, groggy and confused, but alive and unharmed. I told her I was just checking in, that I'd had a weird feeling and wanted to hear her voice. She thought I was being silly, but she humored me. After hanging up, I sat in my truck for an hour, trying to figure out what to do. Call the police? What would I tell them? That someone had approached me at a truck stop and knew personal information about me. That he'd made vague threats about my sister. Even if they took me seriously, what could they do? The man was gone, and I had no way to find him. The worst part was that he was right about one thing. I was completely vulnerable out here on the road. If something happened to Martha while I was 1,000 miles away, I'd never forgive myself. And this man clearly had the resources and knowledge to make good on his threats. I finished my run to Denver, but I couldn't concentrate on driving. Every truck I saw in my mirrors might be him. Every phone call might be news about Martha. Every truck stop might be where he'd approach me again with specific details about this opportunity he wanted me to participate in. When I got back to Tucson, I immediately went to see Martha and convinced her to stay with friends for a while. I told her I'd received some threats related to a load I'd hauled, which wasn't entirely a lie. Then I contacted my dispatcher and told them I needed to take some time off for family reasons. I couldn't risk putting Martha in danger, but I also couldn't become a drug runner or whatever it was this man wanted me to do. That was 3 months ago, and I haven't driven a long haul since. I took a local delivery job that keeps me in Arizona, and I check on Martha every day. I still don't know who that man was or how he learned so much about my life. But I know he's still out there, probably targeting other drivers who don't have the luxury of walking away from their jobs. The scariest part is wondering how many drivers he's approached before me, and how many of them felt they had no choice but to accept his opportunity. Because the truth is, if Martha hadn't been able to stay with friends, if I hadn't had the savings to take time off work, I might have been desperate enough to make that deal. And that's probably exactly what he was counting on. So now I warn every trucker I meet. Pay attention to who's watching you, vary your routes when possible, and trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Because there are predators out there who see us as perfect targets for their operations. And they're more organized and dangerous than most people realize. My name is Robert, and I've been working the graveyard shift at a Valero station on Route 9 in rural Virginia for the past 2 years. It's one of those jobs that pays decent money for what amounts to babysitting an empty store for 8 hours a night. And I've always been a bit of a night owl anyway. The station sits about 15 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but farmland and forest, which means most nights I see maybe a dozen customers total, usually truckers grabbing coffee and gas or the occasional local coming home late from work. The job came with a few perks that the day shift didn't get. There was an old CB radio setup behind the counter that the previous manager had installed years ago, supposedly for emergency communication since cell service was spotty in that area. Channel 9 was the emergency frequency, but I usually kept it tuned to Channel 19 to listen to trucker chatter when things got boring. It helped pass the time, and sometimes the truckers would share useful information about road conditions or ask about services at the station. Everything was routine until about 6 weeks ago, during one of those late October storms that seemed to come out of nowhere in Virginia. The wind was howling outside. Rain was hammering the windows, and I'd lost count of how many times the lights had flickered. It was the kind of weather that keeps most sensible people indoors, so I hadn't seen a customer since around midnight. I was restocking the coffee supplies around 1:30 a.m. when I started hearing strange interference on the CB radio. At first, I thought it was just atmospheric disturbance from the storm. CB radios are notorious for picking up weird signals during bad weather. Everything from distant radio stations to interference from electrical equipment. But as I listened more carefully, I realized this wasn't random static. There were voices, faint but definitely human, cutting in and out through the interference. I walked over to the radio and adjusted the squelch, trying to clear up the signal. The voices became slightly more distinct, though still heavily distorted by static. It sounded like multiple people talking, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The strange part was that they seemed to be broadcasting on Channel 9, the emergency frequency, which was supposed to be reserved for actual emergencies. "Hello," I called into the microphone. "This is KDX 47 at the Valero station on Route 9. Are you folks having an emergency out there?" The voices stopped immediately, replaced by pure static. I waited a few minutes, then tried again. "Anyone out there need assistance? I can contact emergency services if you need help." Silence. Just the hiss of dead air and the sound of rain on the windows. I figured maybe it had been some kind of atmospheric skip, picking up distant radio traffic from hundreds of miles away. It happens sometimes with CB radio during certain weather conditions. I turned my attention back to my work and didn't think much more about it. But the next night, clear skies this time, the voices came back. Same time, around 1:30 a.m., same channel. This time the signal was clearer, and I could make out fragments of conversation. It sounded like several people discussing some kind of situation, using terms I didn't recognize. They mentioned the route and the pickup, and something about making sure nobody sees the truck. My first thought was that I might be overhearing some kind of criminal activity. Drug dealers or smugglers using CB radio to coordinate their operations. It wouldn't be the first time criminals had tried to use seemingly innocent communication methods. I grabbed a pen and started writing down what I could make out of their conversation. "Should be there by 2:15. Same as always. Make sure the lights are off in the back. Remember what happened last time someone saw us." But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. One of the voices, clearer than the others, said, "Robert's working tonight. The new guy. He's been listening to us." They knew my name. They knew I was listening. And they'd called me the new guy, which was strange because I'd been working at this station for 2 years. I grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. "Who is this?" I demanded. "How do you know my name?" The response came immediately, crystal clear through the speakers. "We know because we've been watching you, Robert. Every night for the past month. You work alone, you keep the CB radio on, and you think you're safe in that little glass box surrounded by lights." I looked around the store, suddenly very aware of how exposed I was. The large windows that let me see customers approaching during normal hours now felt like they were letting something else see in. I moved away from the counter, trying to stay in the blind spots between the shelving units. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We want you to understand something, Robert. This frequency has been in use for a long time. Longer than you've been working there. Longer than that station has existed. and we don't appreciate being interrupted by someone who doesn't understand the situation. Another voice chimed in, this one with a different accent. He's just like the others, curious, always asking questions. They never learn to mind their own business. Others? I asked. What others? The previous night shift workers, Robert. The ones who came before you. They all started listening to our conversations, just like you. They all started asking questions. And eventually, they all learned to stop. I felt sick. What happened to them? They learned that some conversations aren't meant for civilian ears. They learned that curiosity can be dangerous. Most importantly, they learned to find other jobs. But then I heard something that didn't make sense. A voice in the background, barely audible, was giving what sounded like a weather report. Or so, severe thunderstorm warning in effect for the Tri-County area until 6 a.m. Winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour with possible tornadoes. The weather outside was perfectly clear. No storms, no wind, nothing. I looked at the date on my watch, October 23rd. Then I heard the voice continue. This is WRELAM with your weather update for October 23rd, 1994. 1994. 30 years ago. The date was right, but the year was wrong by 3 decades. Listen carefully, Robert. The clearest voice continued. What you're hearing isn't happening now. It's an echo. A recording of something that happened in this exact location 30 years ago tonight. And if you keep listening, if you keep asking questions, you're going to become part of that recording too. I fumbled with the radio controls, trying to change the channel, but nothing happened. The voices continued, now describing in detail what I was wearing, where I was standing, even the fact that I was trying to change channels. Robert's getting nervous now, one of them observed with what sounded like amusement. He's trying to turn us off, but it doesn't work that way. Once you've heard us, really heard us, we're always going to be here. The last guy who worked your shift figured that out, another voice added. Took him about a week of listening before he understood. Poor Marcus thought he could just ignore us, thought he could work around our schedule. But you can't ignore something that's already part of the place. Marcus. I'd heard that name before. When I'd started working at the station, my manager had mentioned that the previous night shift worker had quit suddenly, left a note saying he'd found better opportunities elsewhere. But the way these voices talked about him. What happened to Marcus? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Marcus learned that some jobs come with responsibilities he wasn't prepared for. He learned that when you work alone in a place where bad things happened, sometimes the past doesn't stay in the past. And eventually, he learned that it's better to find a different line of work than to become a permanent part of the story. The implication was clear, and it terrified me. But I had to know more. What kind of bad things? What happened here 30 years ago? October 23rd, 1994. The voice replied, taking on a more serious tone. 3 men used this location as a drop point for drug deliveries. They used CB radio to coordinate with their drivers, just like you heard. But something went wrong that night. A state trooper showed up at the wrong time, started asking questions about why a truck was parked behind the station at 2 a.m. Another voice picked up the story. The trooper was alone, thought he was just checking on a routine truck stop. He had no idea what he was walking into. They found his car the next morning, empty, keys still in the ignition. Found him 3 days later in the woods, along with the truck driver who'd tried to run. And the 3 men? I asked, though I was starting to understand. Never found them, never found their bodies anyway. The official story was that they fled the area, probably left the state. But people who work here alone at night, they sometimes hear different stories. They hear the voices of men who never left this place, who are still using the same frequency, still coordinating the same operations 30 years later. I was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd heard. Finally, I asked the question I was dreading. What do you want from me? Same thing we wanted from Marcus and from the others before him. We want you to understand that this frequency is occupied. We want you to respect our work and not interfere with our communications. And most importantly, we want you to make a choice. What kind of choice? You can keep working here, keep listening to us, keep asking questions. But if you choose that path, eventually you'll become part of our operation, permanently. Or you can find a different job, a different shift, somewhere that doesn't have our kind of history. The voices faded into static then, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the steady hum of the fluorescent lights. I stayed at the counter until dawn, jumping at every shadow, every sound from outside. When my replacement arrived for the day shift, I told him I wasn't feeling well and needed to go home early. I called in sick the next night, and the night after that. When I finally worked up the courage to go back, I brought a small radio with me and tuned it to a local news station. I wanted to hear normal voices, normal programming, not the impossible conversations that seemed to seep out of the CB radio every night at 1:30. But it didn't matter what radio I brought. At exactly 1:30 a.m., the voices would come through on any frequency, any device, clear as day. They weren't limited to the CB radio. They were part of the location itself, part of the job, part of working alone in a place where something terrible had happened decades earlier. I gave my 2 weeks' notice the following Monday. Found a day shift job at a different gas station in town, where the worst thing I have to deal with is the occasional difficult customer. I never told my manager the real reason I was leaving, just said I needed a schedule that was better for my health. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I tune a radio to channel 9 and listen to the static. And sometimes, just sometimes, I can still hear them talking about their routes, their schedules, their plans for deliveries that happened 30 years ago and are somehow still happening today. I hope whoever took my place at that Valero station is smarter than I was. I hope they don't listen to the CB radio after 1:30 a.m. And I hope they understand that some jobs come with a history that's too dangerous to ignore and too permanent to escape once you've become part of it. The voices were right about one thing. Once you've really heard them, they're always going to be there. Even now, months later, I can still hear them clearly in my memory. Still talking about their work, still waiting for the next curious night shift worker to start asking questions they shouldn't ask. My name is Serena, and I've been working as an evening shift manager at a Wawa in suburban Philadelphia for the past 3 years. It's a busy location right off Route 202, and we see everything from commuters grabbing dinner on their way home to families stopping for road trip snacks. I've dealt with difficult customers before, angry people complaining about prices, drunk college kids causing trouble, the occasional shoplifter. But I'd never encountered anything like what happened on a cold February evening that still gives me nightmares. It was a Wednesday night, around 8:30 p.m., and we were in the middle of our usual dinner rush. The store was busy but manageable, with people coming and going at a steady pace. I was behind the counter helping with the food orders when a man in his late 30s walked in. He was wearing a heavy winter coat, dark jeans, and work boots. Nothing unusual for the time of year. What caught my attention was how he moved through the store. Not like a typical customer looking for specific items. but like someone conducting surveillance, studying the layout and the staff. He spent about 10 minutes walking the aisles, picking up random items and putting them back, occasionally glancing toward the counter where I was working. Finally, he approached with a single energy drink, a Red Bull that cost $2.89. Simple enough transaction, or so I thought. When I scanned the drink and told him the total, he stood there staring at me for a long moment before saying, "That's not right. This should be $2.50. I double-checked the price on our system and politely explained that the price was correct. $2.89 plus tax brought it to $3.09. He shook his head firmly. "I've been buying this same drink here for 2 years, he said, his voice getting slightly louder. "It's always been $2.50. Your system is wrong." I offered to call over my assistant manager to verify the price, but he cut me off. "I don't want to talk to anyone else. I want you to fix this. Change the price in your system." "Sir, I can't just change prices in our system," I explained, trying to keep my tone friendly and professional. "That's not how our point of sale works. But I can call my district manager if you'd like to file a complaint about the pricing." That's when his demeanor shifted noticeably. The mild annoyance became something much more intense. "You're calling me a liar," he said, loud enough that other customers started looking in our direction. "You're saying I don't know what I've been paying for 2 years." "No, sir, I'm not calling you a liar," I replied, feeling the situation escalating. "Prices do change sometimes, and maybe there was a recent increase. Let me see if I can find out when the last price change was." But he wasn't interested in explanations. "I want this drink for $2.50, and I want you to apologize for treating me like I'm stupid." By this point, we had attracted the attention of everyone in the store. The dinner rush had slowed, but we still had about 8 or 9 customers, and they were all watching this confrontation unfold. I could see my 2 employees behind the deli counter looking concerned. "Sir," I said, lowering my voice and hoping he would follow my lead, "I can give you a manager's discount to bring the price down, but I need you to lower your voice. You're making other customers uncomfortable." "I don't care about other customers," he shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. "I care about being treated with respect, and you've been disrespectful since the moment I walked in here." That was completely untrue. Our interaction had been perfectly normal until he decided the price was wrong. But I could see that logic and de-escalation weren't going to work with this person. I made a decision that I thought would end the situation quickly. "Okay," I said, manually adjusting the price in our system. "I'll honor the $2.50 price this time. Your total is $2.68 with tax." I expected him to pay and leave. Instead, he smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. It wasn't the smile of someone who had gotten what they wanted. It was the smile of someone who had just won the first round of a game I didn't know we were playing. "See?" he said, loud enough for the entire store to hear. "That wasn't so hard. Now I want you to apologize for arguing with me about it." I felt my stomach drop. "Sir, I think we should just complete this transaction so you can be on your way." "No," he said firmly. "I want an apology. You made me feel stupid in front of all these people, and I want you to apologize for it." At this point, I had 2 choices. Give him the apology he wanted and hope he'd leave, or stand my ground and risk the situation getting worse. With a store full of customers and only 3 employees on duty, I chose what I thought was the safer option. "I apologize if I made you feel that way," I said. "That wasn't my intention." He considered this for a moment, then shook his head. That's not a real apology. That's one of those fake corporate apologies. Try again. I looked around the store. Most of our customers had finished their business and were starting to leave, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. My employees were watching nervously, and I could see that one of them had her phone out, probably ready to call the police if needed. "Sir, I've apologized and I've adjusted the price. Please pay for your drink so we can both move on." "I don't like your tone," he said, his voice taking on a threatening edge. "And I don't think you're really sorry. I think you're just saying words because you want me to leave." He was absolutely right. But I wasn't about to admit that. "I am sorry that our interaction got off to a bad start. Can we please complete this transaction?" He pulled out his wallet, slowly counted out exact change, and placed it on the counter. But instead of taking his drink and leaving, he stood there staring at me. "What?" I asked after about 30 seconds of uncomfortable silence. "I'm waiting for you to thank me for my business," he said. "Good customer service means thanking customers for choosing your store." This was getting ridiculous, but I was starting to understand that this person had some kind of mental health issue or personality disorder that made normal social interactions impossible for him. "Thank you for your business," I said. "Say it like you mean it." At this point, my patience was completely exhausted. But I could see that he wasn't going to leave until he got exactly what he wanted from this interaction. "Thank you for choosing Wawa," I said with as much sincerity as I could muster. He picked up his Red Bull, but instead of heading for the door, he walked over to one of our small cafe tables and sat down. He opened the drink, took a sip, and continued staring at me. I waited a few minutes, hoping he would finish his drink and leave. But it became clear that he was planning to stay. At 9:15 p.m., 45 minutes after his initial purchase, he was still sitting there, occasionally getting up to walk around the store, picking up items and putting them back, but always returning to his table. "Sir," I finally said, walking over to where he was sitting. "We're not really a cafe. These tables are for people who are actively eating food from our deli." "I'm a customer," he replied. "I bought something. I'm allowed to sit here." Technically, he was right. We didn't have a posted time limit for using the tables, and he had made a purchase. But his behavior was clearly designed to intimidate and control the situation. "How long are you planning to stay?" I asked. "As long as I want," he said with that same unsettling smile. "This is a public business. I'm not breaking any laws." At 9:45 p.m., an hour and 15 minutes after his purchase, I called my district manager. I explained the situation and asked for guidance on how to handle a customer who refused to leave but wasn't technically doing anything illegal. "Has he made any threats?" my district manager asked. "Not directly, but his behavior is intimidating and he's driving away other customers." "If he hasn't made threats and he's not violating any posted rules, we can't force him to leave. But if you feel unsafe, call the police." The man seemed to sense that I was talking about him because he got up from his table and approached the counter while I was still on the phone. "Problem?" he asked with fake concern. "No problem," I replied, ending the call. "Good, because I was thinking about buying some food. What time do you close?" 11 p.m., I said, dreading where this was going. "Perfect. That gives me plenty of time to decide what I want." For the next hour, he continued his pattern of sitting at the table, occasionally getting up to browse the store and making comments to me about various products. He asked detailed questions about our food preparation, our store, policies, and my work schedule. Every question felt like he was gathering information for some future purpose. At 10:30 p.m., with only 30 minutes until closing, I made a decision. I called the police non-emergency line and explained that I had a customer who had been in the store for 2 hours, was asking personal questions about employees, and was making staff and customers uncomfortable. The dispatcher said they would send an officer to check on the situation. When I hung up, the man was standing right behind me. "Calling the cops on a paying customer?" he asked. "That's interesting customer service." My heart was racing, but I tried to stay calm. "Sir, you've been here for over 2 hours. Our other customers are uncomfortable and my employees are nervous. I think it would be best if you finished your business and moved on." "Or what?" he asked. "You'll have me arrested for shopping too slowly?" 20 minutes later, a police officer arrived. He spoke with the man briefly, then came over to talk to me. The officer explained that since the man hadn't made any direct threats and was technically a customer, there wasn't much they could do unless he refused to leave when the store closed. "Has this happened before?" the officer asked. "Not with him specifically, but we've had issues with people lingering too long," I said. "Usually they leave when we ask them to." The officer went back and spoke with the man again, more firmly this time. After a few minutes of conversation, the man finally got up, threw away his empty Red Bull can, and headed for the door. But as he was leaving, he stopped and turned back to me. "Serena," he said, using my name even though I'd never introduced myself and wasn't wearing a name tag. "I'll see you tomorrow." The officer was still in the store when this happened, and his expression immediately changed. "How do you know her name?" he asked the man. "Lucky guess," the man replied with that same disturbing smile, and walked out into the night. The officer took a detailed report and advised me to call immediately if the man returned. He also suggested that I vary my schedule if possible, and consider having additional staff during my shifts. The man did return the next night, and the night after that. Each time, he would make a small purchase, then find reasons to stay for hours. He never made direct threats, but he continued to demonstrate knowledge about me and my coworkers that he shouldn't have had. He knew our schedules, our names, details about our lives that we had never shared with customers. After a week of this, I learned from other Wawa locations in the area that the same man had been doing this at multiple stores. He had a pattern of targeting female managers, learning their routines, and engaging in the same intimidating behavior. Corporate security was aware of him, and he had been banned from several locations for increasingly aggressive incidents. The final straw came when I arrived at work one evening to find a note on my car windshield. It had my full name, my address, and a message that said, "Thank you for the excellent customer service. I look forward to our continued relationship." I quit that job the next day. The safety of myself and my employees wasn't worth the risk of dealing with someone who had escalated from difficult customer to potential stalker. I learned later that the man was eventually arrested at another location for making explicit threats against a teenage employee. But by then, I had already moved on to a different job at a different company. The experience taught me that some customers aren't just difficult, they're dangerous. And sometimes, the best customer service you can provide is recognizing when someone's behavior crosses the line from annoying to threatening, and taking action to protect yourself and others before the situation escalates beyond your control. My name is Luis, and for the past 12 years, I've owned a small family gas station along Farm Road 184, about 20 miles outside of Brownsville, Texas. It's not much to look at. 2 pumps, a small convenience store, and a service bay where I do basic repairs. But it's been good to my family. My wife Maria helps with the books, and our 2 kids grew up helping around the station after school. We know most of our customers by name, and they know us. It's the kind of business where trust matters more than profit margins, where people still shake hands on deals and pay their bills when they can. That trust, that sense of community safety, was shattered one sweltering July evening when a stranger walked into my station and turned our quiet life into a nightmare that still haunts my family 6 months later. It was around 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of humid summer night where the air feels thick enough to swim through. The heat had been brutal all day, well over 100 degrees, and even with the sun down, the temperature was still hovering around 90. I was alone in the station. Maria had taken the kids to her mother's house for the week, when a white pickup truck pulled up to the far pump. Nothing unusual about that. We get a lot of ranch workers and truckers coming through, especially during summer months when the heat makes daytime travel unbearable. The man who got out of the truck was tall and lean, probably in his 40s, wearing dusty jeans and a sweat-stained shirt. He looked like half the working men who stopped at my station. But there was something in his posture, in the way he moved, that immediately put me on edge. He wasn't walking like someone who just needed gas and a cold drink. He was walking like someone with a purpose, and that purpose involved me. He filled his tank without incident, but instead of coming inside to pay, he stood by his truck for several minutes, studying my station. He looked at the security cameras, noted where my car was parked, even walked around to check the service bay and the back entrance. All of this was visible through my front windows, and all of it was making me increasingly nervous. Finally, he came inside, and I got my first good look at his face. His eyes were cold and calculating, the kind of eyes that see people as problems to be solved rather than human beings. He didn't say hello, didn't acknowledge my greeting, just stood in front of the counter staring at me for what felt like forever. "Help you with something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You Luis Hernandez?" he asked. His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script. My heart started racing. Very few strangers knew my full name, and those who did usually had business with me they'd discussed beforehand. "Who's asking?" "Answer the question. You, Luis Hernandez, owns this station?" Something in his tone made it clear that lying wasn't going to help my situation. "Yeah, that's me. What can I do for you?" He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a photograph, slid it across the counter toward me. It was a picture of a young man, maybe early 20s, Hispanic, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. I'd never seen him before in my life. "You know this person?" the stranger asked. I studied the photo carefully, genuinely trying to be helpful despite my growing unease. "No, I don't think so. Should I?" His name was Miguel Santos. 22 years old. He disappeared 3 months ago, last seen at a gas station on this road. The way he said "was" sent chills down my spine despite the heat. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I don't know anyone by that name. A lot of people stop here, and I don't always get names." The man leaned forward, placing both hands on the counter. "Miguel was my nephew. Good kid, worked construction, sent money home to his mother. He was driving back to Mexico to visit family when he disappeared." "I'm really sorry," I said, and I meant it. "But I don't know what happened to your nephew. Maybe he stopped at one of the other stations along this road." "No," the man said firmly. "I've checked every business between here and the border. You're the last one. And according to his phone records, The last call he made was from this location. My stomach dropped. Phone records? He pulled out a cell phone and showed me the screen. It displayed a call log with timestamps and location data. The last entry showed a call made at 11:47 p.m. on April 15th, with GPS coordinates that matched my station's location exactly. This call was made to his mother, the man continued. Miguel told her he was stopping for gas at a station on Farm Road 184, said he'd be home by morning. She never heard from him again. I stared at the phone data, my mind racing. April 15th was a Monday night. I tried to remember if anything unusual had happened that evening, but 3 months is a long time, and I see hundreds of customers every week. I wish I could help, I said honestly, but I don't remember anyone matching his description from that night. Maybe what? He interrupted, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. Maybe my nephew just vanished into thin air. Maybe his truck just disappeared without anyone noticing. Maybe the local police are right, and he just decided to abandon his family and start a new life somewhere. There was pain in his voice now, underneath the anger, and I realized I was dealing with someone who was grieving and desperate for answers. That made him unpredictable, possibly dangerous, but also human in a way that gave me hope this could be resolved peacefully. Look, I said carefully, I understand you're looking for answers about your nephew. If he was here that night, I want to help you figure out what happened. But accusing me isn't going to bring him back. I'm not accusing you of anything yet, he said. I'm asking you to think harder about April 15th. Think about whether anything unusual happened that night. I closed my eyes and tried to remember. April 15th would have been a Monday, which meant it was probably quiet. Monday nights usually were, especially that late. I tried to picture who might have been working, what the weather was like, whether there had been any problems with customers or equipment. I usually close at midnight, I said slowly. If someone made a call at 11:47 p.m., I would have still been here. But honestly, I don't remember anything unusual about that night. The man's expression darkened. You don't remember, or you don't want to remember? I don't remember, I insisted. I see dozens of people every day. Unless something stands out, unless there's a problem, I don't necessarily remember every customer from 3 months ago. He stared at me for a long moment, then pulled out another photograph. This one was different, not a portrait, but what looked like a surveillance photo taken from a distance. It showed a young man next to a dark sedan, talking to someone whose back was to the camera. This was taken 2 days before Miguel disappeared, he said. Recognize the car? I looked at the photo more carefully. The car looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. Dark 4-door sedan, could have been any one of dozens I saw regularly. Maybe, I said, but I can't tell for sure from this angle. The person Miguel is talking to in this picture, the man continued, is someone who's been asking questions about border crossing routes. Someone who's been recruiting young men to transport cargo across the border. Understanding dawned on me, and I felt sick. You think your nephew got mixed up with smugglers? I think my nephew was naive and needed money, and someone took advantage of that. I think he was recruited to drive something across the border, and when the job went bad, he became a liability. The implications of what he was suggesting were terrifying. If Miguel had been involved with drug smugglers or human traffickers, and if something had gone wrong, then anyone associated with his last known location could be in danger. Even if that's true, I said, I don't know anything about it. I run a legitimate business. I don't ask questions about where people are going or what they're carrying. Maybe not, he said. But maybe you saw something that night. Maybe you witnessed something that could help me find out what happened to Miguel. And if I didn't? If I really don't know anything? His expression grew cold again. Then I'm going to keep looking for answers, and I'm going to keep coming back here until I find them. The threat was implied, but clear. This man believed I had information about his nephew's disappearance, and he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. Whether I actually had that information was apparently irrelevant. "Sir," I said, trying to stay calm, "I understand you're grieving for your nephew, but threatening me isn't going to bring him back. If you really think something criminal happened here, you should talk to the police." He laughed bitterly. "The police told me Miguel probably ran away. Said young men his age sometimes get scared of responsibility and just disappear. They're not interested in investigating further." "Then hire a private investigator, or contact the FBI if you think it involves crossing the border. But don't take it out on me." "I don't need investigators," he said. "I need the truth. And I think you know more than you're telling me." He picked up the photographs and put them back in his pocket. "I'll be back, Luis. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. And I'll keep coming back until you remember what happened on April 15th. He started toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "One more thing. I know you have a family. Wife named Maria, 2 kids. They visit your mother-in-law in Harlingen sometimes, stay there for a week at a time." My blood turned to ice. "How do you know that?" "Same way I know Miguel made his last phone call from the station. I do my research." He smiled, but it was the most frightening expression I'd ever seen. "I hope for everyone's sake that you start remembering what happened that night." After he left, I immediately called Maria and told her to stay at her mother's house until I said it was safe to come home. Then I called the police and reported the threat. Though I wasn't optimistic about their response, given what the man had said about their investigation of his nephew's disappearance. The officer who took my report was sympathetic, but not particularly helpful. Unless he makes specific threats or commits a crime, there's not much we can do. You might want to consider closing early for a while, maybe hiring some help so you're not alone at night. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with a shotgun across my lap, listening to every sound, watching every shadow that moved past my windows. And I tried desperately to remember what had happened on April 15th. Not because I thought I could help find Miguel, but because I was terrified of what this man might do to my family if I couldn't give him the answers he wanted. The next morning, I found a note tucked under my car's windshield wiper. "Time is running out, Luis. Miguel's mother wants closure. Don't make this harder than it has to be." That's when I realized this wasn't just about grief and loss. This was about revenge, and I was trapped in the middle of something that had nothing to do with me, but everything to do with the dangerous world that had apparently claimed Miguel Santos. Whether I remembered anything about April 15th or not, this man had decided I was responsible for his nephew's fate. And until he got the justice he was looking for, my family and I would never be safe. My name is Mike Torino, and I've been a certified environmental contractor specializing in underground storage tank removal for the past 18 years. I've seen everything you could imagine when it comes to cleaning up contaminated fuel sites. Leaked gasoline that's turned soil into a toxic sludge, groundwater contamination that's spread for miles, and enough environmental disasters to fill a dozen reports. But what I found during a routine tank removal job in October has nothing to do with petroleum contamination and everything to do with something that should never have existed in the first place. The job came to me through the usual channels. A property management company that had purchased an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of Salem, Oregon. The station had been closed for about 5 years, ever since the previous owner had walked away from the business in the middle of the night, leaving behind inventory, equipment, and a significant amount of debt. The property management company wanted to renovate the building for use as a convenience store and coffee shop, which meant the old underground fuel tanks had to be removed to meet current environmental regulations. On paper, it was a straightforward job. The station had 3 underground storage tanks, 2 10,000-gallon tanks for regular and premium gasoline, and 1 8,000-gallon tank for diesel fuel. My crew and I had done hundreds of similar removals, and I expected this one to take about a week from excavation to final soil testing. The only unusual aspect was the timing. The property management company was in a hurry to get the work done before winter weather made excavation more difficult, so they were paying premium rates for us to work extended hours. We arrived on site on a gray Monday morning in late October. The abandoned station looked like something from a horror movie. Broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, weeds growing through cracks in the pavement. The fuel dispensers had been removed years earlier, but the concrete pads where they'd stood were still visible, along with the fill ports where tanker trucks had delivered fuel. My crew started by using ground-penetrating radar to confirm the exact location and depth of the tanks, even though we had the original installation blueprints from 1987. This is standard procedure. Sometimes reality doesn't match the paperwork, especially with installations that are decades old. The radar confirmed what the blueprints showed. 3 tanks buried about 8 feet underground, arranged in a triangular pattern beneath what had been the station service area. We began excavating on Tuesday morning, using a large excavator to carefully remove soil around the tanks. This is delicate work. You have to go slowly to avoid puncturing the tanks, which could release any remaining fuel into the excavation area. Environmental regulations require us to monitor air quality constantly during the excavation to detect any petroleum vapors that might pose a safety risk. The first 2 tanks came out without incident. Both contained small amounts of residual gasoline, maybe 50 gallons each, which is normal for tanks that have been out of service for several years. We pumped out the remaining fuel, cleaned the tanks with industrial detergent, and prepared them for transport to a recycling facility. By Thursday afternoon, we were ready to tackle the 3rd tank, the diesel storage unit. That's when things started to go wrong. The diesel tank was buried slightly deeper than the others, and as we excavated around it, we noticed something odd about the soil. Instead of the typical brown or gray earth you'd expect to find, the soil around this tank had a strange, mottled appearance. Patches of dark, almost black earth mixed with areas that looked bleached or discolored. The smell was wrong too. Instead of the petroleum odor we detected around the other tanks, this area smelled organic, like something rotting. My environmental monitor, a guy named Jeff who'd been doing this work longer than I had, stopped the excavation when his air quality readings started showing unusual chemical signatures. "This isn't petroleum vapor," he told me, frowning at his detection equipment. "I'm picking up sulfur compounds, ammonia, and something else I can't identify." We called in a second opinion from a chemist who worked with the state environmental department. She arrived within a few hours and took soil samples from around the tank for immediate analysis. Her preliminary field tests confirmed what Jeff had detected. The soil contained high levels of organic compounds that had nothing to do with fuel contamination. "This looks more like biological decomposition," she told me. "But the chemical signature is unusual. I've never seen readings quite like this." Against our better judgment, but under pressure from the property management company to stay on schedule, we decided to proceed with removing the tank. We'd pump out any remaining diesel, extract the tank, and then figure out what was causing the unusual soil conditions. The tank removal started normally. We connected our pumping equipment to drain any residual fuel, but the pump wouldn't prime. Jeff climbed down into the excavation to check the connections and immediately started retching. "Jesus Christ, Mike," he called up to me, his voice muffled by his respirator. "You need to see this." I climbed down into the pit and immediately understood why Jeff was sick. The diesel tank's access port was partially corroded through, and something dark and viscous was seeping out. But it wasn't diesel. The liquid was thick, almost gelatinous, and it moved in ways that liquid shouldn't move. It seemed to pulse slightly, as if it were alive. "Cut the power to the pump," I yelled to my crew. "Nobody else comes down here." I took photos with my phone, though the images don't really capture what we were seeing. The haze substance appeared to be expanding, slowly flowing out of the tank and pooling in the bottom of the excavation. Where it touched the soil, the earth seemed to change color, becoming darker and more organic looking. The chemist took samples of the substance, handling them with extreme caution and sealed containment protocols. Her field analysis equipment couldn't identify what we were dealing with, beyond confirming that it contained complex organic compounds and showed signs of active biological processes. "This isn't fuel," she said grimly. "This isn't any kind of petroleum product, and it's definitely not supposed to be in an underground storage tank." We evacuated the site immediately and called in a hazardous materials team from Portland. While we waited for them to arrive, I tried to contact the previous owner of the gas station to ask about the diesel tank's history. That's when I learned something that made my blood run cold. According to the county records, the previous owner hadn't just abandoned the business. He'd disappeared. His family had reported him missing 6 months before the station officially closed, but police had assumed he'd simply fled his debts and then started over somewhere else. His car had been found in the parking lot of the gas station, keys still inside, but there had been no signs of foul play. The hazmat team arrived that evening, and they approached the excavation site wearing full environmental suits. Their preliminary assessment confirmed what we already suspected. Whatever was in that tank wasn't petroleum, and it wasn't naturally occurring. It was something that had been put there deliberately. When they finally opened the tank for full inspection, what they found inside made me question everything I thought I knew about environmental contamination. The tank didn't contain diesel fuel or any recognizable liquid. Instead, it was filled with what appeared to be organic tissue, partially decomposed but somehow still active. The tissue mass was roughly human-sized, and it was connected to a network of root-like structures that extended through the corroded portions of the tank into the surrounding soil. The state environmental department immediately classified the site as a biohazard and handed the investigation over to federal authorities. Everyone involved was required to sign non-disclosure agreements, and the entire area was quarantined pending further analysis. I never learned the official results of that analysis. The federal agents who took over the site were tight-lipped about their findings, and the property management company was suddenly very eager to sell the land rather than develop it. The last I heard, the entire area had been designated as a protected wetland, which struck me as suspicious given that it's located in an industrial zone miles from any natural water source. But I did learn one more thing that still keeps me awake at night. When I researched the history of the property, found out that the gas station had been built on the site of a medical research facility that had operated in the 1970s. The facility had been shut down by federal regulators under mysterious circumstances, and all records of their research had been sealed. I've done dozens of tank removals since then, but I always think about that job when I'm preparing to excavate around old underground storage tanks. Because if someone wanted to hide something terrible, something that needed to be kept isolated and contained, burying it in a sealed underground tank would be an almost perfect solution. The tank would keep it separated from groundwater. The fuel would mask any odors, and no one would think to look there for decades. I still have the photos I took that day, though I've never shown them to anyone. Sometimes I look at them late at night, trying to convince myself that what I saw was just some kind of unusual contamination, maybe medical waste that had been illegally disposed of years ago. But I know what I saw moving in that tank. And I know that whatever had been growing in there for the past 30 years wasn't dead when we found it. The worst part is knowing that there are thousands of abandoned gas stations across the country with underground tanks that haven't been inspected in decades. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder how many of those tanks contain more than just old gasoline. My name is Rachel, and I'm a single mother of a 4-year-old daughter named Emma. What I'm about to tell you happened 3 weeks ago during what should have been a routine drive home from my mother's house in rural Pennsylvania. It was an experience that changed how I think about safety, trust, and the vulnerability of being alone with my child on dark country roads where help can be miles away. I had been visiting my mom for the weekend, letting Emma spend time with her grandmother while I caught up on some much-needed rest. My mother lives about 2 hours from our apartment in Reading, in a small town where everyone knows everyone and people still leave their doors unlocked. It's the kind of place where you feel safe, where the biggest excitement is usually the high school football game on Friday nights. We left around 9 p.m. on Sunday, later than I normally would have preferred. But Emma had been having such a good time playing with her grandmother's cats that I didn't have the heart to cut the visit short. The drive home was mostly on state highways, not major interstates, but well-maintained roads that I'd traveled dozens of times. Emma fell asleep in her car seat about 20 minutes into the trip, and I was looking forward to getting home, carrying her up to bed, and starting another week. About an hour into the drive, I realized I was running low on gas. I hadn't filled up before leaving my mother's town, and the fuel gauge was showing less than a quarter tank. I knew there was a BP station about 10 miles ahead, one of those isolated highway stops that serves the scattered rural communities and the occasional traveler passing through. I'd stopped there before, usually during daylight hours, and it had always seemed safe enough. The station appeared out of the darkness exactly where I expected it. A small island of fluorescent light surrounded by empty fields and forest. There were no other customers, which wasn't unusual for a Sunday night at 10 p.m. in that area. The attendant was visible through the windows of the small convenience store, reading something behind the counter. Everything looked normal, routine, safe. I pulled up to the pump closest to the store and turned off the engine. Emma stirred slightly, but didn't wake up. I decided to leave the car running so she'd stay warm, and I cracked the windows slightly for air circulation. The night was chilly for October, probably in the low 40s, and I was wearing a light jacket that wasn't quite warm enough for standing outside. I got out and started pumping gas, keeping one eye on Emma through the rear window. The fuel seemed to be flowing slowly, which was annoying because I wanted to get back on the road as quickly as possible. While I waited, I noticed a dark sedan parked on the far side of the station, near the air pump. It hadn't been there when I first arrived, or at least I hadn't noticed it. The car was empty as far as I could tell, with no sign of its owner anywhere. The gas pump finally clicked off after what felt like forever. I replaced the nozzle and screwed the gas cap back on, then walked toward the store to pay. The attendant, a man in his 60s with gray hair and tired eyes, was friendly but seemed distracted, like he was eager to close up for the night. "Quiet night," I said, making conversation while he processed my credit card. "Usually is on Sundays," he replied. "You traveling far?" "Just heading home to Reading." "About another hour." He nodded and handed me my receipt. "Drive safe. Roads get pretty empty from here on out." I thanked him and headed back to my car. Emma was still sleeping peacefully in her car seat, and I felt that sense of relief you get when you're back on schedule after a minor delay. I started the engine and began to pull out of the station, turning left onto the highway toward home. That's when I heard it. A voice from directly behind me, low and male, speaking just loud enough to be heard over the engine noise. "Don't turn around. Don't look in the mirror. Just keep driving." My blood turned to ice. There was someone in my car, in the back seat, just a few feet from my sleeping daughter. My first instinct was to slam on the brakes, to scream, to do something, anything. But the voice continued immediately. "If you stop this car, if you try to get out, if you make any noise that wakes up your little girl, this is going to go very badly for both of you. Do you understand me?" I managed to nod, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how this had happened. The car had been locked when I went to pay for gas. I was sure of it. But then I remembered. I'd left the engine running and the windows cracked. If someone had been watching, waiting for the right moment, they could have slipped into the back seat while I was inside the store. "Good," the voice said. "Now, I need you to take the next right turn. There's a dirt road about 2 miles ahead. You'll see a mailbox with the name Morrison on it." I knew that road. It led back into the forest, to an area where hunters had camps and where people dumped things they didn't want found. During the day, it was just an old logging road. At night, it was the kind of place where bad things happened to people who were never seen again. "I can't do that," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Your daughter will be fine if you do exactly what I tell you." He interrupted. "But if you don't, if you try to be a hero, if you think you can outsmart me, then she's going to see things that no 4-year-old should see. Do we understand each other?" The threat was clear, and it terrified me more than anything he could have said about what he might do to me. Emma was everything to me, the center of my entire world. And the thought of her being hurt or traumatized because of my choices was unbearable. But as we approached the turn he'd mentioned, something inside me rebelled against the idea of driving into those dark woods. Every instinct I had was screaming that if I turned down that road, neither Emma nor I would ever come home. Whatever this man wanted, whatever he planned to do, it would be easier for him in an isolated location where no one could hear us scream. "Please," I said, "whatever you want, we can figure this out here on the highway. Money, my car, whatever you need." "What I need," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, "is for you to stop talking and turn right at that mailbox. You've got about 30 seconds to make the right choice here." I could see the mailbox approaching in my headlights. In a few moments, I'd have to choose between following his instructions and risking everything on the slim hope that I could somehow get away from him. My daughter's life, my life, everything depended on what I decided in the next few seconds. That's when I remembered something my brother had taught me during a self-defense class years earlier. If someone tries to take you to a second location, that's when you fight. Because whatever they plan to do to you, there is worse than whatever they might do if you resist. As we reached the mailbox, instead of turning right, I slammed my foot down on the accelerator and kept going straight. The car shot forward, and I heard him curse behind me. "You just made a very stupid decision," he said, his voice turning cold and dangerous. "Maybe," I replied, my terror now mixed with determination. "But I'm not taking my daughter into those woods." I could feel him moving behind me, leaning forward, and I braced myself for whatever he was going to do. But then Emma woke up, probably startled by the sudden acceleration, and she started to cry. "Mommy?" she said in that confused, sleepy voice that children have when they wake up in unfamiliar situations. "What's happening?" The sound of my daughter's voice seemed to change something in the dynamic. The man went very still, and I realized that maybe he hadn't expected her to wake up, hadn't planned for her to be a conscious witness to whatever was happening. "It's okay, baby," I told Emma, trying to keep my voice calm and normal. "We're just driving home. Everything's fine." But Emma was fully awake now, and she could sense that something was wrong. "Mommy, who's that man?" My heart stopped. I glanced in the rearview mirror for the first time since this started, and in the dim light from the dashboard, I could see a figure in the back seat next to Emma's car seat. He was wearing dark clothing, and I couldn't make out his features clearly, but he was definitely there, real and dangerous and too close to my daughter. "There's no man, honey," I said, though my voice was shaking. "You're just dreaming." "No, Mommy, there's a man right here. He smells funny." The man leaned forward then, and I felt something cold and sharp press against the back of my neck. "Pull over," he said quietly. "Right now, or I'll cut your throat while your daughter watches." But instead of pulling over, I did something that probably saved both our lives. I started honking the horn, long, continuous blasts that would wake up anyone within miles. At the same time, I began swerving slightly back and forth, not enough to lose control of the car, but enough to make it clear to anyone who saw us that something was wrong. "Stop!" he yelled, but I kept honking and swerving. Emma was crying now, scared by the noise and the erratic driving. But I knew her tears might be what saved us. That's when I saw lights in my rearview mirror. Another car approaching from behind, probably wondering why someone was driving erratically and honking their horn on an empty highway at 10:30 at night. The car pulled up behind us and began flashing its headlights. The man with the knife seemed to realize that his plan was falling apart. "This isn't over," he said. "I know where you live, Rachel. I know where your daughter goes to daycare. I know your routine." The fact that he knew my name, that he'd been watching me long enough to learn my schedule, made me feel sick. This wasn't random. This was someone who had targeted me specifically, who had planned this encounter. But then the car behind us pulled alongside, and I could see it was a state police cruiser. The trooper was gesturing for me to pull over, probably thinking I was drunk or having a medical emergency. I pulled over immediately, and as soon as the car stopped, I heard the back door open and close quickly. When I turned around, the man was gone, vanished into the darkness as if he'd never been there at all. But Emma was still crying, and when I got out to comfort her, I found a small knife on the floor of the back seat, proof that what had happened was real. The state trooper was professional and thorough. He took my statement, called for backup to search the area, and arranged for us to be escorted home. They never found the man, though they did discover that the dark sedan I'd seen at the gas station had been reported stolen earlier that day. Emma and I are both in counseling now, trying to process what happened that night. I've changed our routines, installed a security system, and I never travel alone with her after dark anymore. But the thing that haunts me most isn't what he did. It's what he said about knowing where we live, about watching us. Because sometimes, late at night when Emma's asleep, I look out our windows and wonder if he's still out there, still watching, still waiting for another opportunity. And I know that the only reason we're both alive is because I chose to fight instead of comply. Because I decided that whatever happened on that highway was better than whatever he had planned for us in those dark woods. The police told me I did everything right, that my decision to stay on the highway probably saved our lives. But it doesn't feel like victory when you're looking over your shoulder every day, when every stranger in a parking lot makes your heart race, when your 4-year-old asks why mommy checks the back seat of the car 3 times before getting in. That man is still out there somewhere. And someday he might try this again with another mother, another child. I just pray that when he does, she'll be ready to fight back the way I was. And that she'll understand that sometimes the scariest choice is actually the safest one. My name is Dr. Cameron Walsh, and I'm an emergency physician at Portland General Hospital. I've been working in emergency medicine for 8 years, and I thought I'd seen everything that the human body and mind could endure. I've treated gunshot wounds, overdoses, psychiatric emergencies, and every kind of trauma you can imagine. But what happened to me during a routine drive home after a grueling 24-hour shift challenged everything I thought I knew about reality, medicine, and the fundamental laws of physics. It was 4 a.m. on a foggy November morning, and I had just finished one of the most exhausting shifts of my career. We'd had 3 major trauma cases come in back to back. A car accident with multiple casualties, a construction worker who'd fallen 3 stories, and a domestic violence case that required emergency surgery. I was running on nothing but caffeine and adrenaline, and all I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and sleep for the next 12 hours. The drive from the hospital to my apartment usually takes about 45 minutes through suburban Portland, mostly on well-lit roads that I know by heart. But the fog that night was unusually thick, the kind that reduces visibility to maybe 20 feet and makes familiar landmarks disappear into gray nothingness. I was driving carefully, taking my time, when I realized I was running dangerously low on gas. The fuel gauge was showing nearly empty, and I hadn't been paying attention during the drive because of my exhaustion. I knew there was a Chevron station about 10 minutes ahead. I'd stopped there dozens of times over the years. It was a newer station, built maybe 5 years ago, with bright LED lighting and a modern convenience store. As I approached where the station should have been, I saw the familiar glow of gas station lights cutting through the fog, exactly where I expected them to be. But when I pulled into the station, something felt immediately wrong. The building looked different, older, with a design that seemed to belong to the 1980s rather than the modern structure I remembered. The pumps were the old-style mechanical ones with the rolling number displays, not the digital screens I was used to seeing. Even the Chevron sign looked faded and weathered, as if it had been there for decades. I sat in my car for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe the fog was playing tricks on my tired mind, making things look different than they actually were. Or maybe there was another gas station on this stretch of road that I'd never noticed before. Exhaustion can do strange things to perception, and after 24 hours without sleep, I wasn't entirely trusting my own observations. But I needed gas, and this was the only station for miles in either direction. I got out of my car and approached the pump, noting that even the concrete seemed older, cracked and stained in ways that suggested decades of use. The air smelled wrong too, not just the usual petroleum odor you'd expect at a gas station, but something organic and unpleasant, like old food or stagnant water. When I tried to use my credit card at the pump, the reader didn't work. The screen displayed an error message in a font I'd never seen before, suggesting I pay inside. I walked toward the convenience store, and through the windows, I could see that the interior was completely different from what I remembered. Instead of the bright, modern layout I expected, the store had the dim fluorescent lighting and narrow aisles of an older establishment. The clerk behind the counter was a woman in her 60s, wearing a uniform that looked like it hadn't been updated in years. She smiled politely when I entered, but something about her expression seemed forced, like she was performing a role rather than genuinely greeting a customer. "Pump number 4, I said, approaching the counter. "I need to fill up." She nodded and asked for my payment in advance, which struck me as odd for a modern gas station. Most places let you pump first and pay afterward, especially with credit cards. But I was too tired to argue, so I handed her my card and asked for $40 worth of gas. That's when things got really strange. She ran my card through an old manual credit card machine, the kind that makes physical impressions of the card with carbon paper. I hadn't seen one of those in years. Even more unsettling, when she handed me the receipt, it was dated November 15th, but the year was listed as 1994. "Your machine has the wrong date," I pointed out, showing her the receipt. She looked at it for a moment and then shrugged. "Machine's been acting up lately. Don't worry about it." But I was worried about it. Everything about this place felt wrong, from the outdated equipment to the clerk's strange behavior to the fact that the station itself looked nothing like what I remembered. I walked back to my car, pumped my gas, and tried to make sense of what was happening. The fog seemed even thicker now, and I noticed that I couldn't hear any traffic from the nearby highway. During my usual stops at this station, you could always hear the distant hum of cars and trucks passing by. But now there was only an unsettling silence. It was as if the gas station existed in complete isolation, cut off from the rest of the world. As I finished pumping gas, I noticed other customers in the station. A man in outdated clothing examining snacks in the convenience store. A woman at another pump wearing a hairstyle that looked distinctly retro. But their movements seemed mechanical, repetitive, like they were going through motions rather than making conscious choices. I got back in my car and tried to leave. But that's when I discovered the most frightening aspect of my situation. No matter which direction I drove from the station, I ended up back in the parking lot within minutes. I tried going left, right, straight. Every route led me in a circle back to the same set of old-fashioned gas pumps and that impossible building. On my 4th attempt to leave, I stopped the car and got out to walk around the perimeter of the station. What I found defied all logic and reason. The pavement of the parking lot seemed to extend only about 50 feet in each direction before fading into nothingness. Not fog, not darkness, but an absence of reality itself. It was as if the gas station existed as an island in space, with nothing beyond its immediate boundaries. I went back inside the convenience store, hoping to find answers, or at least use a phone to call for help. But the clerk was gone, and the store was empty except for me. The products on the shelves were brands I recognized, but in packaging that looked decades out of date. The prices were impossibly low. Candy bars for 50 cents, soda for 75 cents, gas for $1.19 per gallon. That's when I found the newspaper rack near the door. Every paper was dated November 15th, 1994, exactly 30 years ago. The headlines were talking about events I vaguely remembered from my childhood. Political scandals, sports scores, entertainment news from an era that should have been long past. I tried to use my cell phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Worse, when I looked at my phone's display, it showed the same impossible date. November 15th, 1994. But that was impossible. Cell phones in 1994 didn't look like my smartphone, didn't have the same interface, didn't have the same capabilities. As the hours passed, or what felt like hours in that timeless place, I began to understand that I was trapped in something that defied medical and scientific explanation. This wasn't a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, because hallucinations don't have this kind of internal consistency. This wasn't a dream, because I could feel pain when I pinched myself, could taste the stale coffee I'd bought from a vending machine that shouldn't have existed. Other customers came and went, but when I tried to talk to them, they responded with generic pleasantries and seemed incapable of engaging in real conversation. They were like background characters in a movie, present to maintain the illusion, but not actually real in any meaningful sense. The most disturbing part was discovering personal items in my car that belonged to the 1994 version of myself. A medical school ID from when I was a student, textbooks I'd owned decades ago, even a photo of myself at age 22. It was as if this place had somehow pulled me back to a time when I was young and inexperienced, when the world was different, and I didn't have the knowledge and expertise I'd spent years developing. I tried everything I could think of to escape. I attempted to drive through what appeared to be solid barriers, hoping they might be illusions. I tried walking in straight lines away from the station, but always ended up back where I started. I even tried damaging my car, thinking that maybe a breakdown would force some kind of change. But the car kept running perfectly, no matter what I did to it. The breakthrough came when I stopped trying to fight the situation and started examining it with the analytical skills I developed as a physician. Instead of panicking about being trapped, I began documenting everything I observed, treating it like a medical case that needed diagnosis and treatment. That's when I noticed the pattern. Every customer who entered the station was alone, tired, and driving an older car. Every person seemed to be from a different time period, but all of them appeared to be experiencing some kind of crisis or transition in their lives. And all of them seemed unaware that anything was wrong with their situation. I realized that this place, whatever it was, seemed to trap people during vulnerable moments, when they were exhausted, confused, or emotionally compromised. It fed on isolation and disorientation, creating a pocket reality where normal rules didn't apply. The key to escape, I theorized, was to reject the premise of the place entirely. Instead of trying to leave through normal means, I needed to assert my knowledge of what was real and what wasn't. I walked back into the convenience store, found the clerk who had reappeared behind the counter, and told her exactly what I thought was happening. "This isn't 1994, I said firmly. "This isn't a real gas station. You're not a real person, and I'm not supposed to be here." Her pleasant expression never changed, but something shifted in the air around us. "I don't know what you mean," she said in the same polite tone she'd used before. "Yes, you do. And I'm leaving now. Not through the doors, not in my car, but by choosing to be somewhere else." I closed my eyes, concentrated on my real apartment, my real life, the real year 2025. And when I opened them, I was sitting in my car on the side of the highway, about 5 miles from where I thought I'd stopped for gas. My fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, and my phone displayed the correct date and time. The sun was rising, burning away the fog, and I could hear the normal sounds of morning traffic beginning to build. I never found any evidence that the station I'd visited had ever existed. There was no Chevron station at that location, no record of any gas station having been built there, no explanation for what had happened to me during those lost hours. But I kept the receipt from that impossible place. The one dated November 15th, 1994. It's physical proof that what I experienced was more than just a hallucination or dream. Sometimes I take it out and look at it. Reminder myself that there are things in this world that can't be explained by medical science or rational thought. As a physician, I'm trained to trust evidence, to base my understanding on observable facts. But that night taught me that reality is more fragile and more complex than I'd ever imagined. There are places that exist outside normal space and time, traps for the unwary and exhausted, pockets of impossibility that can snare anyone who's vulnerable enough to stumble into them. I still work nights at the hospital, but I'm much more careful about my drive home. I make sure my gas tank is full before I leave work. I stay on well-traveled roads, and I never stop at any station I don't recognize. Because I know now that some places aren't really places at all. They're something else entirely, waiting for tired travelers who might not have the strength or knowledge to find their way back to the world. That makes sense. If these stories have sent chills down your spine, you're not alone. The world is full of unexplained encounters, disturbing experiences, and moments that challenge everything we think we know about reality. Here at Verified Fears, we're dedicated to bringing you the most genuine, spine-tingling true stories from people who've lived through the impossible. Did this video leave you wanting more? Make sure to subscribe to Verified Fears and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest content. We upload new true horror stories every week, each one carefully researched and verified to bring you the most authentic encounters with the unknown. Have your own gas station horror story or unexplained encounter? We want to hear from you. Share your experience in the comments below or reach out to us directly. Your story could be featured in our next video, helping others understand that the line between the ordinary and the extraordinary is thinner than we ever imagined. Remember, the truth is often stranger and more terrifying than fiction. Until next time, stay safe out there and remember, you never know what might be waiting for you during that routine stop for gas. This is Verified Fears, where every story is real, every encounter is genuine, and every nightmare is verified.